Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Wednesday, July 24th. Today is day 292. Today has been a significant day here in Washington, D.C. Netanyahu's visit is underway. Last night, Jewish Voices for Peace announced that more than 300 people were arrested because of protests that happened inside of the Capitol building. Hundreds of Jewish individuals and allies were arrested, demanding that the U.S. government stop arming Israel, calling for a ceasefire now and to end the genocide happening in Gaza. Jewish activists and allies said that they were arrested because of their commitment to speaking out for justice, demanding an end to genocide, and calling for an arms embargo now. They said, "Today we carry the memories of every preventable death and every life stolen by the Israeli military's genocide and occupation, and we proclaim not one more." Amid this terror, the collective hope for Palestinian freedom is palpable. From the massive shutdowns of bridges, highways, and train stations to the occupation of government buildings, newspaper offices, their boycott, divestment, and sanctioned victories, the launch of new boycotts, the hundreds of thousands of calls to Congress, educational workshops, film screenings, and artistic creations for a liberated future, all of this and so much more contribute to this united steadfastness. We grieve and remember all of the lives lost. They go on and talk about their activism efforts and why they engaged in civil disobedience. And they call for Israel to stop being armed by the United States government. They call for an arms embargo, and they say never again for anyone. That was last night on Capitol Hill. Today, we began the day and had the privilege of partnering with friends at FCNL, the Friends Committee for National Legislation. You can view the prayer service on our YouTube. We have been calling for the United States government to stop being complicit and participating in Israel's ongoing decimation of Gaza. Our prayer service included voices from member denominations and communions and churches. The Israeli director of Breaking the Silence spoke. Palestinian activist Linda Sarsour also was present today. And on Capitol Hill, and we couldn't have the location that we were going to have it at was right across from the Capitol, but vehicle traffic was shut down at 6 a.m. In-person traffic was shut down at 9 a.m. So we relocated the prayer service. And, I was going to say, as out of touch as ever, the White House press secretary today thanked Israeli Prime Minister in his address for acknowledging President Biden, where world leaders, Biden and Netanyahu will meet on Thursday with plans to discuss a ceasefire deal and discuss the humanitarian situation on the ground. It's just ironic that while they're talking about the humanitarian crisis that has been caused because of the ongoing blockade that existed for 16 years before October 7th and has become so much more severe since then, people in Gaza continue to go without water, continue to suffer because of the current ground invasion that has happened there. Not only that, I mentioned that polio is spreading and has been found as present in Gaza, which is not only a risk to the health of people in Gaza, but to the world. Back to what happened in DC today, crowds gathered throughout DC, but also in other parts of the world. Crowds gathered in Tel Aviv, protesting Netanyahu's speech here in DC, demanding a ceasefire in Tel Aviv. Protesters and family members of hostages held by Hamas gathered to protest and demand a ceasefire deal, and we stand with them, calling for the release of hostages and calling for a ceasefire. Former House Speaker Pelosi, Representative Balint, and Representative Mark Pocan declared they did not or would not attend Netanyahu's address today. Representative Massey was the first Republican to announce he would skip the speech, saying today Congress would undertake political theater on behalf of the State Department, whose purpose is to bolster his political standing in Israel and to quell international opposition to this war. I don't feel like being a prop, so I'm not attending. Chuck Schumer said, even though I disagree with Bibi Netanyahu's policies, I'll attend because the U.S.'s relationship with Israel remains ironclad and transcends any prime minister. The Washington Post reported about Netanyahu's speech before the joint sessions of Congress and said that he offered a defiant address, castigating critics of Israel's war as either being motivated by Iran or anti-Semitism. And I would just say, Prime Minister Netanyahu, that's not my motivation. My motivation is the end of death, the end of the death of your people and the end of the death of the Palestinian people. That's my motivation. The Washington Post continued and said the Israeli leader boasted about Israel's efforts to limit civilian casualties and allow humanitarian aid into the Palestinian enclave, a view that contradicts the United Nations and international aid groups. While dozens of liberal Democrats boycotted remarks, Republicans offered boisterous applause, and many Democratic leaders clapped and stood up during various moments of the speech. The speech also included claims about civilian deaths in Gaza and humanitarian access that are contradicted by the Biden administration. But Netanyahu refrained from directly attacking the ongoing hostage talks, which was the main concern of U.S. officials. Capitol Police said 5 people were arrested today for disrupting Netanyahu's address. All were removed from the gallery, police said on an X post. Disrupting Congress and demonstrating inside the Capitol complex is against the law. And at the Union Station, which is the main train station here in Washington, D.C., protesters took down the American flag and raised 4 more flags, all in solidarity with Palestine, on the 3 flagpoles at the center of Union Station's main entrance. Just after 3:15 p.m., others burned an effigy of Benjamin Netanyahu at the base of the flagpoles. Senator Bernie Sanders watched the address on TV in his office across the street and said, "I think, Netanyahu, you have somebody who is a war criminal who's a demagogue." Sanders reported afterward, "I think he's a liar, and I think in order to save his political skin in Israel, where he's enormously unpopular, he's prepared to starve hundreds of thousands of children in Gaza. He has no regrets for missing the speech." And Sanders said, "It really is, I think, sad that he was invited to speak before a joint session of Congress." Netanyahu is set to meet with Vice President Harris and separately with President Biden. Republican presidential nominee Trump is set to host Netanyahu on Friday at Mar-a-Lago. Posted a letter to him by President Abbas a day after the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania, wishing him strength and safety. Trump wrote back to Abbas, saying, "Mahmoud, so nice, thank you, all will be good," and added to his post, "Looking forward to seeing Bibi Netanyahu on Friday, and even more looking forward to achieving peace in the Middle East." In terms of other news, the Israeli delegation set out to Qatar for the hostage release talks on Thursday that will only leave next week after Netanyahu discusses the current frameworks deal with President Biden. Last week, Israel's Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer attended a key meeting in Abu Dhabi concerning post-war Gaza, according to the Washington Post. The meeting was hosted by the UAE and was attended by Brett McGurk, who's an advisor for Biden. One source said the meeting was convened because of the UAE's frustration about a lack of vision for post-war Gaza. Opposition lawmaker Benny Gantz said that a quarter of hostages that were still alive in Hamas captivity have died since the last ceasefire proposal was presented in negotiations. "We could have moved it along weeks ago. I say this because I know the hostages don't have another day or another minute." That's Benny Gantz. Elon Musk said that his internet service has been activated in a Gaza hospital. He'd offered that early on after October, and he says that this happened with the help of the UAE and Israel. He is the chief executive of SpaceX. Israel will evacuate 6 sick and wounded Gazans to the UAE for medical treatment through an evacuation flight that will carry 250 patients from Gaza. It's expected to take off from an airport near Eilat next week. In the West Bank, an officer of the Palestinian Customs Authority identified as Abed Sarhan was killed by the IDF in the West Bank town of Tubas this morning. Palestinian medical sources reported that to Haaretz. The IDF said they're investigating the killing. Another Palestinian, Ahmed Nadal Aslan, was killed by Israeli forces overnight into this morning in the village of Kalandia. That's a checkpoint outside of Jerusalem. According to medical sources in the West Bank, 6 Palestinians were wounded in an exchange of gunfire, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. That's in the West Bank. Masked men torched vehicles in the village of Hawara. Hawara was one of the villages that was attacked last year. They lit bonfires near the village, according to a security source. The riot started after stones were thrown at settlers that were driving through the village. In the following hour, dozens of masked men from a nearby settlement descended on the village and began vandalizing property, and Israeli soldiers eventually intervened to distance the settlers. This is really, really important. This just happened in the last 24 hours. At a conference in the Knesset entitled Israel's Return to the Temple Mount, far-right security minister Ben-Gvir vowed he's going to change the status quo at Haram al-Sharif. And currently, public prayer, Jewish prayer on the Temple Mount, Al-Aqsa compound in Jerusalem's Old City, it's forbidden, it's prohibited. But Ben-Gvir has said he's going to change that. This has drawn immediate criticism from both coalition and opposition lawmakers. Gallant, the defense minister, said Ben-Gvir is constantly trying to blow up the Middle East. "I categorically reject the idea of changing the status quo." Former War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz said, "In the same way that Ben-Gvir didn't make decisions on Muslims visiting the Temple Mount during Ramadan, he will not make decisions today. He needs to be stripped of his authorities related to sensitive security issues." In response to talks held between Ben-Gvir and senior Netanyahu allies about the creation of a new war cabinet that could include the far-right minister, Gallant said Ben-Gvir is a pyromaniac sitting in the Israeli government who is trying to set the Middle East on fire. The IDF said today they intercepted 2 drones that were approaching Israel's territory from the east. Hostilities continued on the border between Lebanon and Israel. Germany reported that they have made no decision to end their supply of weapons to Israel. CMEP and our membership coalition is calling for the withholding of weapons from the United States to Israel until the war on Gaza can be brought to an end. I'd encourage you to read the article by Religious News Services that came out last night about the letter that we just posted of global bishops, 200 bishops and Christian leaders calling for a comprehensive ceasefire. Lord have mercy. Christ have mercy. Amen.